Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lecture on language key ideas. Language is the human capacity for acquiring and using complex systems of communication. So it is really difficult to define language because for every other person, a definition for language might vary. And for some, it might be a mode of expression. For some, it might be a tool for communication. For some, it might be to express their deep emotions, to convey something to the other person. So basically, communication is the base aspect or foundational aspect of language. And linguistics is the scientific study of language. So when we say scientific study, it will involve many processes as if in a scientific process: data collection, the analysis of data, verification, scientific deductions. All these processes together makes linguistics a scientific science. Languages evolve and diversify over time. So it is not static, it is dynamic. Over the time, many changes will appear in different languages. It's not like limited to any one language. All languages across the world will evolve and diversify over time. So the same language that we're speaking today might had different words, maybe different expressions, before 10 years and after 10 years, this language will definitely be different for the future speakers. And language can be considered as the pairing of lexicon, and it is a set of syntax. Lexicon means words. So the words will be paired together to form the sentence, the word order, which we call as syntax. Sentence formation is what we call as syntax. So it is the pairing of different words with a set of syntax, how words can be put into order, how that can be organized to form a sentence. And language family is a group of languages that descend from a common ancestor. That common ancestor is what we call as proto language. So we have a lot of language families of knowledge, like Indo-European, which is the single largest language family in the world, Sino-Tibetan, Afro-Asiatic, Bantu, Malayo-Polynesian. So a variety of language families. So how can we figure out, okay, this group of languages belong to this one particular language family? So basically, the linguists, the people who are doing this scientific study of a language, they will observe the features, they will analyze the language, they will study the language. Then they will figure out that, okay, these many languages have got similar properties, so I have to categorize this under this one particular language family. And they will trace back these features to a common language, which we call as a proto-language. And the English word language derives from the Latin word lingua, means tongue. And here we have Ferdinand de Saussure, who is considered as the father of linguistics. He was a Swiss linguist who studied the foundational aspects, the key ideas about language. One of his most prominent notion about language was that it is a combination of lang and parole. So when we say language is equal to lang plus parole, we have to have an idea about what is lang or what is parole. So lang is the language system, as we call the grammatical rules, the particular speech patterns of a language, the language system which is common for me and for you. So it is common for everyone. There is no difference in the lang that we have today. But parole is the concrete speech or the individual act of speaking, which means my individual act of speaking is different from the next person who's sitting beside me, even though we are speaking the same language. So that is what differs the parole of every other individual. So for every person, lang is common, but parole is different. So that will make the language of every individual different, because for every other person, language will be a combination, new combination every day, new combination every other person. It is a language system combined with individual active speaking. So this idea was proposed by Ferdinand de Saussure, the Swiss linguist. He formulated this notion of language, that it is a combination of lang and parole. Language can be considered as a system. It is a mental faculty because humans are inherent with this capacity for linguistic competency, because we are linguistically competent. We know somehow we are inherent with this capacity to learn new words, construct sentences. So if you just look at a child, you can clearly understand this aspect of language being a mental faculty, because before being enrolled in a school, before the formal instruction begins, the child somehow learn so many words, built up his or her vocabulary to a certain extent, many words each day. And for some children, they might even construct complete sentences before going to school. So that clearly shows the idea that language is a mental faculty. It is an inherent capacity for human beings. Language is a formal symbolic system, which means whatever we are trying to represent through language is actually a symbol. That is what Saussure rightly calls as a sign. Language is a sign, which is a combination of signifier and signified. Signifier being the sound, which means, like, if I'm saying tree, that sound tree is what we call as signifier, and signified will become the image or the concept that you're receiving at your end. If I'm saying tree, you will receive an image of a tree, which might be different trees for each and every person. So language is a combination of these signifier and signified, and it is arbitrary. For a person who's standing in a playground, the image of a tree might be the sole one lawn tree that is standing in the center of a playground. But for a person who is from the Amazon rainforest, the tree might be a different picture. So it will also vary from place to place, person to person, which makes language a formal symbolic system which is arbitrary. The concept of arbitrariness will be discussed later. Language is a tool for communication, which is very simple to understand because it is for the communication purpose that we are using language. Yeah, language is considered as a unique status of human language. It is something that makes human beings different, unique. Here are some definitions made by world-renowned theoreticians, linguists about language. Edward Sapir in 1921 described language as a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions, and desires by means of a system of voluntarily produced symbols. R.A. Hall in the year 1969 described language as the institution whereby humans communicate and interact with each other by means of habitually used oral, auditory, arbitrary symbols. Noam Chomsky in the year 1957 described language as a set which can be finite or infinite sentences, each finite length and constructed out of a finite set of elements. Bloch and Trager in 1942 described language as a system of arbitrary vocal symbols by means of which a social group cooperates. Derbyshire in 1967 described language as undoubtedly a kind of means of communication among human beings. It consists primarily of vocal sounds. It is articulatory, systematic, symbolic, and arbitrary. Robbins in 1985 described language as a symbol system based on pure or arbitrary conventions, infinitely extendable and modifiable according to the changing needs and conditions of the speakers. So all these definitions will give us the idea that it is a tool for communication, but that symbols or language, which is a symbol that is expressed through vocal sounds, and those sounds along with the language, it is modifiable, it is extendable, it is dynamic, it is not static. We cannot say that language is what it was in the previous day. It is like evolving and diversifying over time. Now, moving on to the characteristic features of language, we can say that language is a chief human means of communication as well as of self-expression. It is a system of symbols, primarily of vocal symbols we call as phonemes. We have 44 phonemes in English language, and those symbols together, it will create meaningful words. Meaningful words together create sentences. Meaningful connected sentences create discourse or a whole text. And the relationship between expression system and the content system is arbitrary. So what we are expressing, what I'm like sounding right now is creating a meaning at the other end, but that meaning is arbitrary. So if I'm saying a word in English language, that will make sense to those people who are using English language. For non-English users, it doesn't make sense, which clearly expresses the idea of arbitrariness, which means a word and its meaning has no logical relationship. Language exhibits structure. There is a duality of structure in language because from the meaningless vocal sounds or symbols, which we call as phonemes, we are creating meaningful words. That is a second level morpheme. So that is the duality of structure that is displayed by every other language. It exhibits structure. And human languages are structure dependent. We follow certain rules in language. And every language has a limited number of speech sounds, and the total number of words in a language also can be listed, but the number of sentences in a language is infinite, which means we can create as many sentences, but the number of speech sounds, it is limited. We have already identified the speech sounds with which we are making sounds and sentences, words and sentences, but the speech sounds, the number of speech sounds is limited. And the total number of words, every other word in today's world can also be listed. That is possible, but it is a difficult task, but it is possible. But the number of sentences with which we are conversing each other day, it is infinite, because every other day, me and you, both of us, and every other person in this whole world is creating new sentences, which explains the creativity or the productivity feature of language. It is creating every other day. We are producing infinite number of sentences each day, which makes language an open-ended system, which means we cannot say that it is closed today, because it's not a closed system. It's an open-ended system which is evolving every other day. The property of recursiveness, again, a characteristic feature of language, which means we can create or we can add as many phrases to a sentence. We can embed as many sentences within a sentence by making use of this relative close pattern. So that property is what we call as recursiveness. Language is a system of systems. So when we study language, we have to deal with different subsystems like phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics. All these systems will together create the umbrella term language. And language is not genetically transmitted, but it is acquired from the environment. We can clearly identify that aspect from a child, because children, even though their native language might be something, but if they are put in an environment which speaks English or any other speech community, they will definitely acquire that language from that speech community which they are accustomed with. So we cannot say that if because the parents are speaking English, the children will definitely speak English. That is not entirely possible, because it is not genetically transmitted. The children will learn, they will acquire English language from the parents, relatives, community. If they are speaking in a different language, definitely this children will also acquire that language from the environment. Language is largely a set of social conventions and traditions. It is largely a set of habits. It is subject to change. So all these characteristic features gives us the idea that language can clearly be called as an institution. It is like any other institutions in our society. It is filled with all the habits, cultural, traditional practices, and social conventions. Human language has got some unique aspects apart from animal communication, which are displacement, because human beings can talk about something that is not present in the environment, in the physical environment, but at the same time, they can talk about it. Like I can talk about something that is ongoing in the United States or in Canada, right, when I'm sitting in India. So that's the quality of displacement that we are talking about. Human languages have got this ability to create or produce as many infinite sentences, that the number of sentences that we can create is infinite. Duality or double articulation, we are all based, there is structure dependence, which means we are based every other sentence on the two foundational aspects of phonemes and morphemes. So that is a duality or double articulation of human language. Human languages can pattern or fashion or mix and match all the words to create infinite sentences. It is dependent on a structure. The rules of the grammar, the rules of the language are already clearly identified and put together so that the users of the language can follow the same structure. Reciprocity or interchangeability, which means any sender of a message can be a receiver of the message. Any speaker can also take up the role of listener. So the roles can be reversed. That role reversal quality of human languages is what we call as reciprocity or interchangeability. Human languages are open-ended systems. It is evolving over time. It is dynamic. It is modifiable. We can talk about subject specialized events, subject specialized knowledge by making use of the available knowledge that is given to us. So human languages have got these specific properties that we can say it is not something that we can see in animal communication. Then coming to the last topic of this lecture, that is speech and writing. How speech is different from writing, how the spoken language or the spoken form of language differs from the written form of language in terms of explicitness. So the first point would be explicitness. The speech can be inexplicit, which means it can pose some questions, doubts, apprehensions, because based on the way in which the speaker is giving out the lecture or a presentation, we might develop some sort of doubts, apprehensions, because maybe because of the speaker's accent, maybe because of the pronunciation, maybe because the grammatical constructions that the speaker is using. So speech can be inexplicit, which means the clarity might be less for the spoken form, but clarity will definitely be there for the written form because it is permanent, it is available there. Even if we are having any doubts, we can always look up into dictionary or internet to clarify our doubts. Clear sentence boundaries are not really necessary for spoken form of language because we are like looking at a lecture or a conversation or a very like casual conversation between friends. We might not need clear sentence boundaries in a casual conversation or a spoken form of language, but written form of language clearly demands clear sentence boundaries. Simple structure is acceptable in spoken form, but more complex structure we need for written form. Repetitiveness is found in spoken form. Why? Because the speaker is giving a lecture, he or she might feel the need to repeat some idea so that the learners will grasp that idea. But in written form, repetitiveness is not necessary because whatever that is written in the text that is available, it is permanent, it is not going anywhere. So the speaker is not available, which means the text is permanent. We can always go back to whatever doubts we have. We don't need repetition in written form. Normal non-fluency, which means the pauses, the breaks that we are making in between a conversation in spoken form, that is normal for spoken form. But fluency, that pauses or breaks are not really acceptable in written form. We cannot say slot fillers or the breaks that are visible in spoken form is not acceptable in written form. Monitoring features, when a speech or a spoken form is ongoing, the speaker will definitely monitor the progress of the listeners. He or she will ask questions like, did you get that? You understood? Catch my point? Like all these monitoring features is not visible in written form. The speaker will definitely interact with the audience when he or she is making a lecture or giving a presentation. So interaction features are acceptable in spoken form, not visible in written form. Then the features will definitely be reflecting informality. We can be as much as informal in spoken form, but that is not acceptable in written form. So these qualities or these features will give us an idea that, okay, spoken form and written form are different in its own sense, but both these are acceptable prominent forms of language. So spoken form has got its qualities, features, makes it acceptable. Written form, it is permanent, it is available to the speakers, to the users of language forever, so that is also acceptable. So we cannot say that either of these forms of language is superior or inferior. That is not possible. Both spoken form and written form of language are two powerful, two prominent expressions of language. Thank you all for watching.